I've unfortunately stained everything that was white grey. I don't know how I've done it.
Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow.
Dad?
Yeah, I'll be fine.
You know what?
What?
I know how the rainbow's made that.
The one thing that
Out of 7
I think about a lot is that, I take for granted most of the time, that Ruth and I are very much a couple.
Well,
Even if we sit together in the evening on the couch and say nothing,
the thing is, the sun shines.
we're together, and that in itself is a bonding and a comfort. It's the missing Ruth, it's just her not being here. I mean, I feel a lot happier, even if she can't move and she's back in bed here. I'll be happy. She'll issue her commands from the bed. So, it sounds silly and old-fashioned. I really love her, and I miss her. But we're coping.
On Saturday night, Alan Clark, Roy Porter and Tony Parsons joined Jermaine Greer and friends for the last word on the battle of the sexes.
Have men changed?
Is a woman's place still in the kitchen?
Can men and women ever agree?
How many of these battles have been won?
And just who has won them?
The Last Word, Saturday 11:15 on BBC2.
On The Late Show tonight, Britain's press barons reach for the sky by beginning the scramble for cable TV. Theatre in crisis. Can more new writing save British theatre from terminal decline? And how television took the lid off Irish politics. That's The Late Show on BBC2 at 11:15.
This is BBC2. Now Newsnight with Kirsty Walk.
Tonight, a senior Tory resigns his party position after making serious insults against France and Germany. Will Europe be the Tories' decline and fall? Good evening. The Tories' troubles with Europe are building up a head of steam. The question is, will it blow, or will Mr. Major's trick of turning the Money for Europe vote into a question of loyalty take the pressure off? But Kenneth Clarke turns the heat up yet higher by admitting that even more money will go to Europe, all the while reiterating that the Prime Minister means business when he threatens a general election. We'll be talking to the Chancellor, then taking the temperature of two influential backbenchers, one in the Euro camp, the other not. Also, will BHATch fall? The UN envoy, Mr. Akashi, says he's worked out a peace deal. But on Newsnight, the Secretary-General of NATO, Willy Klaus, talks in different terms. He says NATO is ready to take its responsibilities and use further force. Richard Holbrooke, the American Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, is here to assess the likelihood of another NATO attack. And are civil servants like they used to be? With the Commons Select Committee report on the future of the civil service out tomorrow, we scrutinise the top man. Such is the febrile atmosphere among the Tories at Westminster, general sedation might be the only way to calm them down. It's this Europe thing that's doing for them. When John Major cracked the whip, making Monday's European Finance Bill an issue of confidence, the Eurosceptics cracked up. First, there was a Eurosceptic challenge for the chairmanship of the 1922 committee, and then a vice-chairman of the party, Devon MP Patrick Nicholls, vented his Europhobe spleen in his local paper, insulting the French, a nation of collaborators, and Germany, whose contributions to Europe had been to plunge Europe into 2 world wars in living memory, he said. Nasty stuff, and he's had to resign as vice-chairman. And tonight, it looks as if the Eurosceptics have scored a direct hit on the Chancellor, Kenneth Clarke. Mark Mardell reports from an increasingly hysterical House of Commons.
Welcome, John.
Only 2 minutes ago.
Yes, but I didn't know. Tonight, a party at the Speaker's house. Light relief for Mr Major at the end of another bad day. And once again, the source of his discomfort has been that running sore in the Conservative Party, the debate over Europe. There's a feverish, almost hysterical atmosphere in the Commons at the moment, and it's all down to Monday's vote on the EC budget. The rebels had hoped that if they could defeat the government, it might lead not to a general election, but to somebody else taking over from John Major as Prime Minister. But the Chancellor has now stoked up the temperature by saying that simply isn't a possibility. Ken Clarke tonight went public, announcing the government would inevitably fall if it was defeated. 5 senior cabinet ministers and John Major decided on the policy at an informal Sunday supper 10 days ago. Other cabinet ministers then gave their agreement. Therefore, the Chancellor said no member of the cabinet could honourably take over as leader in the event of a defeat. The Eurosceptics despair at this sort of policy.
There is no reason on earth to make assumptions that everybody is going to stay on forever. And I think that the idea of some kind of collective suicide note is not what I would have thought the kind of thing that one would expect to be volunteered. And I can't understand why it's been put forward.
If the temperature wasn't high enough already, the Chancellor had released some new figures on the European budget, not calculated to delight his backbenchers.
There is a very depressing story going around the lobby at the moment, that our contribution for the European community for this year is being revised upwards by a massive £850 million. I wonder whether my right honourable friend could tell the House whether this is just an unpleasant rumour, or whether there's any truth in it.
The rumour was nearly right. The Treasury report in February of this year estimated the British contribution to the EC budget for the next year at around £1.7 billion. The revised estimate from Kenneth Clarke today is more than £2.4 billion, an increase of £732 million. The Eurosceptics say, told you so.
I think this is a case of gross incompetence on the part of the Treasury and of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And it's not a small matter. We're now talking about an absolutely massive difference between the figures that he originally put out in his letter, which went to all MPs, therefore it became a national issue. And in doing that, he has frankly made a mockery of the Conservative Party.
The man who drafted Labour's clever amendment to the Maastricht Bill has helped design another tricky trap for Monday and says they could get the general election they desperately want.
Labour's amendment will set out Labour's policy on Europe, that we want to see a reform of the common agricultural policy, an end to fraud and waste, and we want the government to accept the social chapter on behalf of the British people.
Have you got a prayer, though?
Yes, we have. This is a divided government. This is a government that has had to use extraordinary measures in order to try and bring their rebels into line. They are divided, and there's every prospect that we could win the vote on Monday.
If this wasn't all enough, there's been another resignation tonight. Patrick Nicholls has gone as party vice-chairman after penning an extraordinary article on Europe for his local paper. He described the French as a nation of collaborators, said Germany's unique contribution to Europe had been to plunge it into 2 world wars, and his verdict on the EC was, I don't much like Europe, I wish I was not in the European community. Even the MP who's trying to become the leader of Tory backbench opinion to give Eurosceptics more of a voice doesn't like that sort of talk.
My own personal view is that that's extremely tactless, because although I'm very strongly Eurosceptic myself, we have to live with our French and German neighbours, allies and friends, and I don't think the kind of language in that article is at all helpful.
One hardcore Eurosceptic has said to me that the 1922 vote tomorrow, the EC budget vote on Monday, they're just the Gallipolis. We're now going to make a push on the Western Front. Roughly translated, that means he's over there now, trying to collect enough signatures to challenge John Major. And he's assured me that if he does get enough, there will be a challenge, and a senior former cabinet minister will be the stalking horse.
Mark Mardell. Earlier I spoke to the Chancellor, Kenneth Clarke. I asked him if he was happy with the revised figures he announced today.
Yes, they're a change in the forecast of figures which are notoriously difficult to predict, and they reflect on the deal we did in 1988 when Mrs. Thatcher was Prime Minister, and that they show a change for the current year. I put all these figures out, lots of facts, to stop all these red herrings about individual years getting in the way of the Edinburgh deal, the bill we have in front of the House next Monday, which will add £75 million to our total contribution, a contribution which gives us access to the single market. It's a good deal, it's one that was praised at the time, and we're getting enormous benefits from it right now as our recovery gets underway and we sell more into this massive open single market.
But why were these not the figures discussed when John Major had the Queen's Speech debate? Indeed, he said the figures had already been weighted for growth and so forth.
No, he was using last year's figures, and they always get changed. They normally put them out at the time of the budget, but that would have been after the debate. I can, if you like, give you long technical arguments about different financial years, the flow of agricultural and structural fund payments in, the rate at which our contributions are called, the way the British abatement is calculated. I've put out a massive information, very open government, to make sure that everybody who wants to can digest all that stuff before next Monday. Then they'll see that the figures that we've always given for the Edinburgh deal, the figures for the percentage of GDP and for the fact that it's 75 million next year are clear. That is the good deal that was praised when John made it. It's the deal the Labour Party and the Liberal parties have always supported, and that's what we're talking about and voting on next week.
But surely to have to admit to the underestimates under pressure from a Eurosceptic doesn't very much show a sure-footed government.
There was no pressure from a Eurosceptic. They're going around still talking about the most extraordinary figures, and they don't understand it. Most of them have still got to settle down to go through the 12 pages. They'll see that our contribution's gone up and down over the years. It is difficult because most countries use calendar years, January to January for their financial year. We have to work out where our financial year, April to April, actually catches all these payments and receipts. And it's gone up and down over the years. It's gone up and down after a very satisfactory deal in 1988 that Margaret Thatcher did, and which no one's complained about for years and years. Now, John Major did another deal, adding a bit to that. It was a very small amount, less than the Commission wanted. That's what we're debating next.